The sun was setting over Pine Grove Shopping Center when a young boy noticed something that would change his life forever. Alex, just 15 years old, was walking home from basketball practice, his worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. The evening air was crisp, and most stores were getting ready to close for the day. That's when he spotted an elderly man outside Morrison's supermarket. The old gentleman was struggling with several heavy grocery bags, his hands trembling as he tried to manage them all at once. A few people walked past, busy with their own errands, barely giving him a second glance. Alex stood there for a moment, his heart telling him to help while his mind reminded him of all the times his mom had warned him about approaching strangers. In their small town, where racial tensions sometimes bubbled beneath the surface, he'd learned to be cautious. But something about the old man's situation touched him deeply. Taking a deep breath, Alex walked over. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely, his voice gentle but clear. "Would you like some help with those bags?" The elderly man looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. He was tall but slightly hunched, wearing a simple sweater that had seen better days. His eyes, though tired, held a kind warmness that made Alex feel at ease. "Oh," the old man said, seeming a bit startled at first. That's very kind of you, young man." He paused, looking at the heavy bags. "I suppose I could use a hand. My car's just over there." Alex carefully took the heavier bags, noticing how the old man's hands were shaking less now without the weight. As they walked to the car, the elderly gentleman introduced himself as Mr. Wilson. His voice was soft, but carried years of stories in its tone. "I used to manage these just fine," Mr. Wilson said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "But lately, everything seems to get a little harder each day." He chuckled, but Alex could hear the sadness beneath the laugh. As they reached the car, an old but well-maintained sedan, Alex helped arrange the groceries carefully in the trunk. He made sure the eggs and bread were placed safely on top, just like his mom had taught him. Mr. Wilson watched, clearly impressed by the boy's thoughtfulness. "You know," Mr. Wilson said, "not many young people would stop to help an old-timer like me these days." He reached for his wallet, but Alex quickly shook his head. "Please, sir, I don't want any money," Alex said firmly. "My mom always says helping others is its own reward." The words came out naturally, something he'd grown up believing. Mr. Wilson studied Alex's face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." He pulled out a business card instead. "Well, if you're ever in the neighborhood again, maybe you could help an old man with his groceries another time." Alex took the card, noting the simple address written in neat handwriting on the back. He couldn't know it then, but this small interaction would lead to something extraordinary. As he watched Mr. Wilson's car drive away, Alex felt good about his decision to help, unaware that this simple act of kindness would soon change both their lives in ways he could never imagine. Walking home in the growing darkness, Alex couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Wilson. There was something different about him, not his age or his apparent loneliness, but a hidden depth that Alex couldn't quite figure out. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an incredible story that would touch not just their lives, but their entire community. Over the next few weeks, Alex found himself regularly stopping by the supermarket after school. It wasn't planned. It just felt right. Each time he saw Mr. Wilson struggling with his groceries, his face would light up with that same warm smile, as if seeing an old friend. At first, their conversations were simple. Weather, school, basketball. But gradually, they started sharing more. One particularly warm afternoon, as they walked to Mr. Wilson's car, Alex opened up about his family life. "Mom works at the hospital during the day and picks up evening shifts at the diner," he said, carefully placing the grocery bags in the trunk. "She's trying to save up for my college, but I know it's tough on her." Mr. Wilson listened intently, his eyes showing genuine care. "That's quite a strong woman you have for a mother," he said thoughtfully. "You know, I see that same strength in you, young man. On another day, when rain poured heavily outside the store, Mr. Wilson shared his own story. My Rose, he said softly, looking at the raindrops sliding down the car window. She loved days like this. Said the rain washed everything clean, gave the world a fresh start. His voice carried the weight of loss, and Alex understood that Rose was no longer with him. These moments of sharing built something special between them. Alex learned that Mr. Wilson spent most of his days alone in his modest-looking house, though he never complained about it. He had a way of turning every conversation into a life lesson, but not in a preachy way adults sometimes did. Instead, his words carried the gentle wisdom of someone who had seen both the sunshine and storms of life. One day, after helping with not just groceries, but also organizing some boxes in Mr. Wilson's garage, Alex noticed something unusual. Hidden behind the cardboard boxes and old tools were photographs, lots of them. One showed a younger Mr. Wilson in what looked like a big office, shaking hands with important-looking people. Alex didn't ask about them, but he started wondering about his elderly friend's past. The local community began noticing their friendship too. Some people at the supermarket would whisper and stare. The cashier, Mrs. Chen, once pulled Alex aside. "Be careful," she warned, her voice low and concerned. "People might get the wrong idea about why you're helping him." But Alex just smiled and shrugged it off. He knew what was in his heart, and that was all that mattered. Mr. Wilson faced similar questions. One afternoon, Alex overheard an old friend of Mr. Wilson's suggesting that he shouldn't trust a teenager so much. "Times aren't what they used to be," the man said. But Mr. Wilson's response was firm. "That boy has shown me more genuine kindness than most adults I know." Their unlikely friendship grew stronger with each passing day. Alex started sharing his dreams of becoming a doctor, explaining how he studied extra hard in science class and volunteered at the local clinic on weekends. Mr. Wilson would listen with genuine interest, occasionally offering bits of advice that seemed to come from years of experience in facing life's challenges. What Alex didn't know was that behind Mr. Wilson's humble appearance lay a story that would soon change everything. The simple grocery trips and conversations were building towards something bigger than either of them could imagine. But for now, it was just two people from different worlds, finding common ground in simple acts of kindness and understanding. The beauty of their friendship lay in its simplicity. No expectations, no judgments, just genuine human connection. Neither of them could have guessed that fate had bigger plans in store, plans that would start unfolding in the most unexpected way. Word travels fast in small towns, and the friendship between Alex and Mr. Wilson had become the talk of Pine Grove. It started with subtle glances and hushed conversations that would stop when either of them walked by. Soon, those whispers grew louder, like waves building before a storm. One sunny afternoon, while Alex was helping Mr. Wilson tend to his small garden, a fancy car pulled up next door. The neighbor, a well-dressed woman who'd lived there for years, marched over with purpose in her steps. "Mr. Wilson," she called out, ignoring Alex completely. "Could I have a word with you? Privately." Alex pretended to focus on the tomato plants, but he could hear snippets of their conversation. The woman's voice was filled with fake concern. "You don't really know anything about this boy. These days, you have to be careful. What if something goes missing?" Mr. Wilson's response was loud and clear, meant for everyone to hear. "The only thing missing in this neighborhood is kindness, and that boy has it in spades." He turned and walked away, leaving his neighbor red-faced and speechless. Later that day, as they sat on the porch drinking lemonade, Mr. Wilson sighed. "You know, people fear what they don't understand. They see an old white man and a young black boy becoming friends, and their minds jump to the worst conclusions. But you know what I see? I see a kind soul who gives up his free time to help an old man for nothing in return." The rumors didn't stop at the neighbors. At school, Alex started noticing changes too. Some kids would give him odd looks in the hallway. One day, he overheard someone in the cafeteria. Bet he's just trying to get that old man's money. It stung, but Alex remembered his mom's words. Your character is shown by how you act when nobody's watching, not by what everybody's saying. Even some teachers seemed concerned. His favorite teacher, Mrs. Thompson, pulled him aside after class one day. Alex, honey, she started, her voice dripping with worry. I hope you know what you're doing. People are talking. Alex looked her straight in the eye and replied, I'm just helping someone who needs it, Mrs. Thompson. Isn't that what you taught us about being good citizens? She had no response to that. The situation got more complicated when Alex's mom received phone calls from concerned community members. They suggested her son was being manipulated or worse, but she knew her boy's heart. After one particularly nasty call, she sat Alex down at their small kitchen table. Baby, she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, I raised you to see people's hearts, not their appearances or what others say about them. If helping Mr. Wilson feels right to you, then you keep right on doing it. Just be careful and stay true to yourself. Through it all, the friendship between Alex and Mr. Wilson only grew stronger. They found humor in the situation sometimes. Mr. Wilson would jokingly ask, should we give them something real to gossip about? Maybe I'll teach you my secret cookie recipe. That'll really get them talking. What nobody in town knew was that Mr. Wilson had been keeping a close eye on how Alex handled the pressure. He watched as the young man continued to show up, day after day, never letting the whispers change his heart. He noticed how Alex would still wave and smile at the very people who spread rumors about him. The whole situation was teaching both of them valuable lessons. For Alex, it was about standing firm in what you believe, even when the whole world seems to doubt you. For Mr. Wilson, it was a reminder that genuine goodness still existed in the world, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Neither of them could have predicted how soon their friendship would be tested in an even more dramatic way, or how the entire community would be forced to confront their prejudices. But for now, they continued their routine, two friends ignoring the whispers, sharing stories, and proving that true friendship knows no boundaries. It started as a normal Saturday morning. Alex had promised to help Mr. Wilson clean out his garage, something they'd been putting off for weeks. The air was crisp and autumn leaves danced across the driveway as Alex walked up to the familiar house. But something felt different today. The morning paper was still lying on the front steps, untouched. Alex knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The silence that followed made his heart beat faster. Mr. Wilson always answered promptly. It was one of his old-fashioned habits he took pride in. Mr. Wilson. Alex called out, trying to peek through the window. That's when he noticed the garage door was slightly open. Relief flooded through him. Mr. Wilson must have already started without him. But as he pushed the garage door up, that relief vanished instantly. There, among boxes and old furniture, lay Mr. Wilson on the concrete floor, unconscious. A stack of fallen boxes nearby suggested he'd been trying to move them himself. Alex's whole body went cold with fear, but his mind suddenly became crystal clear. Last summer's first aid training at the community center kicked in automatically. Alex rushed to Mr. Wilson's side, checking for breathing and a pulse, just like he'd learned. The pulse was there, but weak. Mr. Wilson's skin felt cold and clammy. With shaking hands, but a steady voice, Alex pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Emergency services, what's your location? The operator's calm voice helped Alex focus. He gave the address and described the situation, surprised at how steady his own voice sounded. Sir, can you hear me? Alex gently shook Mr. Wilson's shoulder while staying on the line with the operator. No response. Following the operator's instructions, Alex began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted out loud, just like in training. The concrete floor hurt his knees, but he didn't stop. For what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Alex continued the compressions. His arms ached, sweat dripped down his face, but he kept going. "Come on, Mr. Wilson," he whispered between counts. "Don't leave yet. You still haven't told me about those old photos I found." Finally, Mr. Wilson gave a weak cough. His eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. "What? What happened?" he mumbled. "Don't try to move, sir," Alex said, fighting back tears of relief. "Help is coming. Just stay still." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Alex squeezed Mr. Wilson's hand. "You're going to be okay. I'm right here." The paramedics arrived in a blur of activity. As they worked, Alex noticed things about the garage he'd never seen before. Behind the dusty boxes lay hints of a different life. Golf clubs with country club logos, framed newspaper clippings, and what looked like business awards. This wasn't just a simple garage, it was a storage room of memories from a life Mr. Wilson had never mentioned. "Good thing you found him when you did, Stun," one paramedic said as they loaded Mr. Wilson into the ambulance. "Quick thinking with the CPR. You probably saved his life." Alex watched the ambulance drive away, his hands still trembling. He looked down at his dirt-stained jeans, remembering how his mom had just washed them yesterday. It seemed so trivial now. As he turned to lock up the garage, his eye caught something that had fallen from one of the boxes. A magazine cover featuring a much younger Mr. Wilson, standing in front of a massive corporate building. The headline read, "Technology Pioneer Revolutionizes Industry." Alex stared at the photo, his mind spinning. Who exactly was the old man he'd been helping all these months? Why had he kept this hidden? Before he could process this discovery, his phone buzzed. It was his mom calling. But little did Alex know, this was just the beginning of a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the entire community's perspective. The real story was about to unfold, and it would start with a police car pulling up to his house the next morning. The next morning started with the sound of birds chirping outside Alex's window. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying yesterday's events over and over. His mom had already left for her early hospital shift, leaving a note saying she'd try to stop by the hospital to check on Mr. Wilson during her lunch break. Alex was sitting at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around in his bowl, when he heard it, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up, his heart stopped. A police car was pulling into their driveway, its white and blue colors stark against the morning sun. Time seemed to freeze. Alex's spoon clattered against the bowl. In their neighborhood, a police car usually didn't mean good news. His hands felt cold as he walked the door, memories of yesterday's discovery in the garage mixing with fear in his stomach. Before he could reach the handle, there was a knock, firm but not aggressive. Alex opened the door to find two officers standing there. The younger one had kind eyes, while the older officer wore a serious expression that made Alex's heart race even faster. "Are you Alex?" the older officer asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. When Alex nodded, the officer continued, "We need you to come with us to the hospital. Mr. Wilson's been asking for you." Alex blinked, confused. Am I in trouble?" The younger officer smiled, breaking the tension. "Actually, son, we're here as an escort. Mr. Wilson insisted we bring you properly. Said something about making sure his hero arrives in style." Relief flooded through Alex's body, making his knees weak. As he grabbed his jacket, he could hear the neighbors' curtains rustling across the street. No doubt this would add fuel to the town's gossip fire. A police car in his driveway. The ride to the hospital was surreal. Instead of sitting in the back like he'd feared, they had him sit in the front passenger seat. The younger officer, Officer Thompson, told him how Mr. Wilson had woken up early this morning and immediately started telling everyone about the brave young man who saved his life. "He wouldn't stop talking about you," Officer Thompson said, turning onto the hospital road. said you were the only one who saw him for who he really was, not what he had or didn't have. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Alex noticed how different people's reactions were to seeing him with the police. Some looked concerned, others curious. But the officers' respectful treatment of him seemed to puzzle them all. They reached Mr. Wilson's room, a private one, Alex noticed, in the hospital's nicest wing. Through the window, he could see his elderly friend sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. Several important-looking people in suits were gathered around him, but Mr. Wilson's face lit up when he saw Alex. "There he is," Mr. Wilson called out, his voice stronger than Alex expected. The suited people turned, and Alex recognized one of them from the magazine photo he'd seen yesterday. Before entering, Officer Thompson put a hand on Alex's shoulder. "You know, son," he said quietly, "in our line of work, we see a lot of the bad in people. But sometimes we get to be part of something good. What you did yesterday, and every day before that, helping Mr. Wilson without knowing who he really was, that's the kind of thing that gives us hope." The older officer nodded in agreement. "You might not realize it yet, but your story is already changing people's minds in this town. Sometimes it takes a child to teach adults the simplest lessons about humanity." As Alex stepped into the room, he had no idea that this moment would mark the beginning of something much bigger than himself. The truth about Mr. Wilson was about to come out, and with it, a change that would ripple through their entire community. But for now, he was just happy to see his friend alive and smiling, ready to hear whatever story was about to unfold. Inside the hospital room, everything seemed different from the simple life Alex had known with Mr. Wilson. The machines beeped softly, and sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the space where several distinguished-looking people stood. But Mr. Wilson's warm smile remained the same, even from his hospital bed. "Come closer, my boy," Mr. Wilson beckoned, his voice tired but filled with purpose. As Alex approached, he noticed his mom standing quietly in the corner of the room, still in her hospital uniform. She gave him a small, proud smile. One of the suited men stepped forward, extending his hand. "So you're the young man we've been hearing about. I'm Richard Chen, Mr. Wilson's lawyer for the past 30 years. He gestured to the others. "We're all members of the Wilson Technology Foundation's board." Alex's mind spun. Foundation? Board members? He looked at Mr. Wilson, who chuckled softly at his confusion. "I suppose I owe you an explanation," Mr. Wilson said, adjusting himself in the bed. "That old house you've been visiting. It's just one of many properties I own. The simple life I've been living. Well, it was a choice I made after Rose passed away." The room fell silent as Mr. Wilson continued his story. "You see, I founded Wilson Tech Industries 40 years ago. We revolutionized computer processing technology. Made millions, then billions. But after Rose died, none of it seemed to matter anymore. I started living simply, wanting to see who would show kindness to just an ordinary old man." Alex listened, remembering all those hidden photographs in the garage, the magazine cover he'd discovered. It all made sense now. "In the past 5 years," Mr. Wilson went on, his eyes growing misty, "countless people have walked past me at that supermarket. Business people, community leaders, even some old friends who didn't recognize me anymore. But you stopped to help, expecting nothing in return." Mr. Wilson reached for a folder on his bedside table, his hands shaking slightly. "This is why I asked everyone to be here today. Inside this folder is paperwork establishing a new scholarship program. The Wilson Hope Scholarship Fund, worth $50 million. Gasps filled the room. Alex's mom covered her mouth with her hands. "This fund," Mr. Wilson continued, "will provide full medical school scholarships to students who demonstrate exceptional kindness and character, regardless of their background. And you, my young friend, will be its first recipient." Alex stood there, stunned. His mom was crying now, but they were happy tears. The lawyer stepped forward again, explaining more details, but Alex could hardly process it all. "But, sir," Alex finally managed to say, "I didn't do anything special. I just helped because it was right." Mr. Wilson's eyes twinkled. "That's exactly what makes it special, son. You saw me as a person, not an opportunity. Your kindness wasn't a performance, it was genuine. That's what this world needs more of." The board members began discussing logistics, but Mr. Wilson raised his hand for silence. "There's more," he said. "I'm also establishing a community outreach program inspired by our friendship. It will fund projects that bring people together across generations and backgrounds. Because sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is to give people a chance to see each other's humanity." Looking at his mom, Alex could see her shoulders straighten with pride. The same neighbors who had whispered about him, the same community that had doubted his intentions, they would all soon understand that kindness, pure and simple, had been his only motive all along. "You've given an old man his faith back," Mr. Wilson said softly. "You showed me that goodness still exists in its purest form. Now, I want to make sure that goodness has every chance to grow." As the autumn sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows, Alex realized that this wasn't just about him or even the scholarship. This was about showing the world that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could bridge the deepest divides, that seeing past appearances and prejudices could lead to extraordinary changes. The story wasn't over yet. In many ways, it was just beginning. But right there, in that hospital room, something beautiful was taking root, something that would grow to touch countless lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. 5 years passed like pages turning in a book, each one filled with changes that transformed not just lives, but hearts. The small town of Pine Grove had become something different, something better. On a bright spring morning, the local university's medical school auditorium was packed with people from all walks of life. At the podium stood Alex, now 20 years old, wearing a crisp white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. His audience included a new class of scholarship recipients, their families, and most importantly, Mr. Wilson, sitting in the front row with a proud smile on his face. "When I first helped an elderly man with his groceries 5 years ago," Alex began, his voice steady and warm, "I had no idea I was walking into a story that would change so many lives. I was just doing what my mom had taught me, helping someone who needed it." The audience listened intently as Alex continued. Among them sat Mrs. Chen, the former supermarket cashier who had once warned him to be careful. Now she was the coordinator of the Wilson Hope Community Center, a place where young people regularly volunteered to help seniors with daily tasks. The Wilson Hope Scholarship has now helped 50 students pursue their dreams of becoming doctors, Alex said, gesturing to the diverse group of recipients. But the real miracle isn't in the money. It's in the way our community has changed. He was right. The town that had once buzzed with suspicious whispers now hosted regular intergenerational events. The neighbor who had warned Mr. Wilson about trusting Alex now ran a mentorship program pairing elderly residents with local teens. "Mr. Wilson taught me that wealth isn't just about money," Alex continued, his eyes meeting his mentor's. "True wealth is in the connections we make, the barriers we break, and the kindness we share." Mr. Wilson, though older now and using a cane, still had that same twinkle in his eye. The past 5 years had given him a new purpose. He'd moved from his simple house to a larger one, but not for luxury. He'd turned it into a community gathering space where people of all ages and backgrounds could meet and learn from each other. Alex's mom watched from the side of the stage, still in her hospital scrubs. She'd just finished her shift. But she wasn't working 2 jobs anymore. Instead, she helped run the scholarship program, ensuring other hardworking parents could see their children's dreams come true. Today, as we welcome our newest scholarship recipients, Alex said, "I want you to look around this room. See the faces of people who once passed each other on the street without a second glance. Now they're family." The local police officers who had escorted Alex to the hospital that fateful day were there too. They'd become regular speakers at the community center, working to build trust and understanding between law enforcement and local youth. Our story isn't just about a scholarship, Alex continued, his voice growing passionate. It's about what happens when we choose to see the best in each other. When we look past appearances, age, and assumptions to find the humanity we all share. Mr. Wilson slowly stood up, leaning on his cane, and the entire auditorium rose with him in respect. The old man's eyes were moist with tears of joy as he looked at what his friendship with a kind-hearted teenager had created. 5 years ago, I helped an elderly man with his groceries. Alex concluded, his own eyes glistening. Today, we're helping an entire community carry its dreams. And this is just the beginning. As applause filled the auditorium, Alex stepped down to hug Mr. Wilson. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the tears in both their eyes. In that moment, everyone could see that this wasn't just a story about a scholarship or a wealthy man's generosity. It was a testament to how simple kindness could ripple outward, touching life after life, breaking down walls, and building bridges in their place. The audience stood together, doctors, students, community members, all united by a story that began with a simple act of kindness. And in every face was the knowledge that sometimes the greatest changes start with the smallest choices, and that love and kindness could indeed transform a community, one heart at a time.